Hey gang, welcome to Ozone Late Night. This is part one of my conversation with Jason Howell, host and producer over at twit.tv. All right, everybody, welcome to another installment of Ozone Late Night. Joining me tonight is Jason Howell, host and producer over on the Twit Network. You can hear him along with many other wonderful members. I almost butchered it. I almost didn't say wonderful correctly, but I managed it. It's just really, really bad. Wonderful members of the Twit crew over at twit.tv. Jason, welcome to Ozone Late Night. I apologize for almost botching that opening.
No, you did great, Joe. I mean, it is late night after all. It's like 5:37 p.m. I feel like I'm about ready for bed, and so I get a little stir crazy at bedtime too. So I totally get it. It's all good.
Well, this has been this particular show having you on here. This is an interesting one because there was a sequence of events around your appearance. One of these things where the cosmic threads of the universe somehow link things up in that way that just happens. And you can attribute that to whatever you want. Sure. But in prep for this episode, because you're also a musician, which we're going to talk about, I didn't put that in the intro, but that is absolutely something that Jason is. He's also a musician, and I would recommend going over. Is it jasonhowell.com? Is that your website?
No, jasonhowell.com. I unfortunately missed out on that one, and I will forever rue the day that I didn't jump on it. If you go to Yellow Gold Music,
that's it.
yellowgoldmusic.com will take you there. jasonhowell.net, I think, also forwards there. But yeah, yellowgoldmusic.com.
I'm going to note that in the background so I have the, there it is, just to make sure I don't repeat it the wrong way. So I went over because, by the way, just for people listening, me and Jason have not spoken. We didn't do any prep for this, anything. So he is coming into this completely blind, which is always something I admire about people, because if you listen to some of the shows that I do, you're going to think I'm a raving lunatic, and no normal person without incredible stones would come into this blind, which Jason has. So he has no idea how I normally do things. I did say in my email that I'm not a topic-based talker. I am a more stream of consciousness type, so he is warned that way.
All right.
But I don't do a ton of research on people that I have on. Now, obviously, it's a little different with you because you're on Twit, so I have some familiarity as anybody who watches does, so it's a little different. But I don't do Wikipedia deep dives, and number one, it makes me feel like a stalker, which I don't want to be anywhere near, and the other thing is, I don't feel like it's a really organic conversation if I know the answers. If I ask you something and I know the answer, yeah, I don't know. That doesn't really do much for me as the person talking. So
yeah,
but
I can totally support that. I've done plenty of interview shows over the years, and I've gone through the whole the gamut of being over prepared and being under prepared and seeing where it goes. And yeah, I would agree with you. It's nice to not know things about the people that you talk to, because then it's a discovery along with the people who are listening. And
it also allows for kind of natural weird tangents to happen. That's another nice thing. When you don't really know, it makes your brain fire, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but it makes me feel like my brain works differently if I don't know where everything is necessarily leading.
There you go.
So one thing I do though is if somebody is a creative, I do like to know a little bit about, listen to filmmakers, watch movies, that type of thing, just so I'm not completely. I don't want to go to somebody who makes dramatic documentaries about, third world nations and hunger and say, oh, so you make movies about superheroes, right? And then look like a fool. So
yeah, you don't want to get it wrong.
That. Right. Exactly.
You might not know a lot about a person, but you don't want to get details wrong.
Exactly. I want to avoid a complete train wreck as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I went and I was listening to your music. And the most recent track you released, which I think you said was an electronic offcut that really didn't fit with the album.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great. I thought it's a great track. But then I listened to the
Freeform.
Rest of the album. What was it? Is it
Freeform?
Freeform. I don't know where I'm.
Freeform's the name of the song that I released outside.
What was the album? What was the most recent album?
Fever Dreamer.
I was going to say Fever kept sticking in my Fever Dream. That's Dreamer.
Fever Dreamer
Dreamer.
by Yellow Gold.
So I listened to that album, and it reminded me, and you and I think are not all that separated in terms of age. I won't make you tell how old you are if you don't want to. I'm 45, so we're somewhat,
I don't
think.
care. I'm 47. So yeah, we're very close.
Yeah. So I was reminded of a band that I listened to way back in college called Catherine Wheel.
Catherine Wheel. Okay, I'm familiar with Catherine Wheel. Right. They were not, I wouldn't say that was a band that I listened to on a regular basis. Or honestly, if I'm completely honest, I probably only heard them a handful of times. But I'm familiar with them. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I was reminded, again, it wasn't like it was exactly a similar thing, but there was a similarity to some of the way the songs were structured, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Which led me to contact somebody that I knew in college and haven't talked to in 20 years and reconnect.
Oh, right
because your song reminded me of another song that he and I, both like this band. And I did a show with him in the last week. It was great. It was a blast. So.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. Honestly, as a creator, well, I mean, it's like this with podcasting in a very different way, but with music, I love hearing stories like that because that tells me that something that I did had an impact on somebody else's life in some way. And it's just really, as a creator, it's nice to hear stories like that. Cause it's like, as far as music is concerned, like I created a vacuum. I do it for myself 100%. And I just happen to kind of like put it out. Like I'm not the music producer who is like, all right, I'm gonna, schedule all of these singles to come out, one after the other and do this blanket TikTok campaign so that I can maximize exposure. Like I'm literally just creating music because I like the music. I like to make music and I can make music that I like to listen to as well. And I've done the work, so I might as well just put it out there for someone to find it. So when I hear stuff like that, it's like the icing on the cake. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it was a really neat kind of, I mean, I enjoyed the music anyway, but it was just funny how immediately it led me. And this is one of these people that I don't reminisce about college all that much, honestly. I really don't. It's kind of one of those things where, yeah, college was fun. There's things I remember about it that I liked, but I don't long for the days when I was in college and free. I mean, some people do.
Yeah.
But it was funny because I just thought about it. I'm like, man, I haven't talked to Doug in so long. I wonder how he's doing. And then I found that he's a composer and he's putting out albums. And I'm like, wow, this is wild because I like his albums too. So it was
that's great.
That interesting chain of blocks from a random event because
gotta love it.
I might have emailed him otherwise, maybe, but I hadn't done it up to this point. So it was almost like something had to kind of crack me in the side of the head to go, yeah, just email him.
Yes, indeed.
So let's talk about, because I'm always interested in how people came to where they were. Because I talked to a lot of different creative people, and it seems to be about a 50-50 split, where there are people who said, yep, I always knew I wanted to do this. I went to school, trained for this, and I'm doing this. And then the other half are, I always knew I wanted to do this, and then I couldn't make a career out of that, and I happened to take a random job, and then suddenly I was doing something else that I really love, and now that's the thing. So... Yeah. Because you've been involved in a lot. I mean, was it Buzz Out Loud? Was that the show?
Yeah, okay. Buzz Out Loud at CNET in like 2006 is when I think I joined that whole crew. I mean, that was the beginning of podcasting, was right around that time. Maybe a couple of years before that. But yeah, pretty early on.
So was it that because you're musical as well, was that something that you started off, I'm going to be a musician, and then realized, oh, that's extremely difficult? Or what is the arc that takes you from... Because I don't know what you intended to do when you were younger, so I don't know if you went to college for this, but to take you to now where you are, what was the path?
I mean, when I was younger, I don't know that I ever thought I'm going to be a musician when I grow up, or I'm going to be, honestly, I did not know what I wanted to be when I grow up. Like when I think back to my childhood, I'm like, I have no idea what my answer is to that. I mean, there was a time where I thought, oh, it'd be neat to go to space, but I don't know that I necessarily thought I'm going to be an astronaut. You know what I mean? And my grades totally reflected that through school. What did resonate with me eventually, probably late junior high, early high school, was music. And I kind of found my crew. In school, I grew up, ultimately the friends that I was with the last 4 years of my kind of like, regular school years were surrounded by people who were just intensely creative in all different facets. And so, I was really into the music aspect of things, and as well as film. Other friends were really into design and art and everything, and we would just collaborate on things all the time. So I've got boxes full of video cassettes and 4-track tapes and all of these collaborations, different bands. We were all hopping between each other's bands and everything. So that ultimately ended up being my creative, that ended up being my spark. That was like, oh, wait a minute, there's this thing that I really enjoy doing, and it's music and it's film and it's being creative. But when I went to university, right out of high school, because that's what you're supposed to do, I had no idea. Like, never even occurred to me that I could make music production or maybe film, but it never occurred to me that I could do what I'm passionate about and turn that into a career. So like my major was like mass communication, which in the grand scheme of my career, my professional career, was kind of appropriate. I certainly work in a communication realm, but I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what it was leading to. And again, my grades reflected it. It wasn't until I moved to San Francisco, a number of years later, moved to SF in '98, from Boise, Idaho. I grew up in Boise, Idaho. And had to get out of small town Boise, Idaho, figured there was probably something going on in San Francisco, went there, met a wonderful woman, and she was very involved in school, and she was the one that kind of pointed out, like, you could go to the city college here and they have like a recording studio that you can kind of use. And then if you take your credits and then transfer over to San Francisco State, they've got a whole department, the Broadcast and Electronic Communication Arts department. And you can, so long story short, I suddenly realized that, oh, wait a minute, I can do what I love to do and make that a career. And here's how I can do it. And suddenly my grades, like, I was the top of the class. I actually wore the hood for my department at the graduation ceremony because I find, which is only a testament. I don't say that to brag, but it's only a testament to the fact that, like, you can be horrible at school until the moment that you suddenly realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to school because I have to. I'm going to school because I get to learn about the thing that I love. And everything kind of changed for me there. So I think my expectation was I was going to graduate from university and get a job in a recording studio. That's been my lifelong dream. Like, wouldn't it be amazing to live like a hermit in a recording studio and be surrounded by all that technology and have bands coming through and be, calling the shots and working with them in a collaborative way to kind of, help them realize their creative vision and everything like that. I honestly thought that was going to happen. But that required a lot of free interning, which I was willing to do. But at a certain point, I had to pay the bills, and I really wanted to get out of working in the restaurant industry, which was how I, funded my schooling years, my education, and saw that there, so I kind of broadened it out and applied for an internship at CNET. And they had a video internship, and I was like, well, video can't be that much different. Like, if I'm technically adept at audio technology, I'm sure I can learn the video stuff. And they agreed. They brought me on for the internship. That turned into a full-time job on the business side. So I was doing video stuff. At some point, not very long after that, probably like a year after that, Tom Merritt, who was on the consumer side of CNET, was doing a podcast called Buzz Out Loud. And they needed, so it was Tom Merritt, Molly Wood, and then Veronica Belmont, who was doing the audio production. She was the producer for it. And anyone who listens to Buzz Out Loud, it's got a pretty solid and active fan base, even to this day. They recognized that Veronica was talking more. And so she was becoming more like on the mic, and they wanted to get someone in there to be the producer and do the audio technical stuff. And Tom knew that I was at CNET, and he was like, hey, you're an audio guy. Do you want to do it? And so he pulled me over and put me into the producer seat for Buzz Out Loud from an audio perspective. And which I saw as a win, because I was like, I might not be in a music like in a recording studio, but I am doing audio production for a living, and I'm getting paid a paycheck, and like, that's amazing. Like, I'm gonna follow this. And I remember Tom told me when he pulled me over, I quoted him a couple of times on this. He said, Jason, like, podcasting's at its infancy right now, and we're doing this really successful podcast. Like, you come over here, like, there's no guarantees, but you could ride a wave. Like you could be at the very beginning, of something really big. And like, I didn't need any convincing. I was like, I want out of business to business content because it was dull and boring, talking about blade servers and all that stuff. Like, I don't care about the enterprise, but I do care about personal technology and consumer technology and, the funness and the energy around that, that they had in Buzz Out Loud. So that's how I got into podcasting.
That's interesting too, because that sounds like one of those things where you almost had kind of a grafting of the two sides of it, where because there is a creativity to producing, to being part of that show. It may not be as direct as being a musician or anything like that, but and then
yes. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No. Go for it. Go.
Well, no. I was just going to say there is a creativity to it. And what I recognized early on is that what I loved about podcasting were those opportunities to kind of inject what I was passionate about into it. So, there were opportunities to write music, or there were opportunities to create bumpers or these things, that were like playful and fun. And those were very creative. And it was like, oh, well, I can do that. Like, why don't we create a funny, theme song for Brian Cooley or whatever when he comes on the show and, says something stupid, or there are these opportunities to, it's not just talking format where people sit in front of a microphone, and sure, there's some creativity to that, but there were also these, all sorts of other ways that I could get involved, that I could pull from like my my legacy creativity from high school, and just goofing around and creating things and bring that into podcasting. And I've really tried to do that over the years.
Well, it seems like too in the early stages of it with podcasting, there wasn't really a form factor to it, I guess, if you want to put it that way, but it was very experimental. There was a lot of, if this is fun, we'll just do it type of thing. And there still is. I shouldn't say that as if suddenly podcasting is now this enterprise,
but it's matured a lot.
Thing.
I mean, it has matured a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely formats. There's approaches to it that you can you pick up the patterns of it, I guess, now more than. I mean, obviously, now we seem to have come out of that bubble, but there was this period where every show, that every time you'd hear, oh, we're investing $10 million, whatever it is, and these shows. I mean, even the advertisements sounded so similar to where you went, oh no, this has become commodified. This is now podcasting this is what people will think this is. And I'm glad that's kind of ending, because I mean, I've been doing my show for a long time and it's a complete mess, but that's the beauty of it, is there's nobody to tell me it isn't a mess, and there's there's no definition. Yeah, it's great. It's great when you can just do whatever you want, within reason, obviously, but as long as you're not literally chewing food on mic, which there's only a certain subset of people who like that, but I'm not one of them.
But I would argue there is a subset of people who like that. And that's the beauty of podcasting. That right there. Yep, is that there's a billion different niches out there, and as small and like micro as they might be, there are enough people in this world that there are a handful of people that actually really dig listening to people eating food into a microphone.
No, I'm in total, and that was exactly where I was going. Was just because that's not for me doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't be able to find a show that goes to that audience. That's we're at a point in consumer technology and the internet in general where I think there is a lot of cynicism. There's a lot of disenfranchisement? Is that the word? There's a lot of people who feel like the internet is now more negative than positive. And I understand where that comes from. There is a lot of terribleness, as there is in the world in general, but it becomes amplified, it becomes magnified on the internet many times, because I think a lot of times people feel like because they don't have to look somebody in the face, they can suddenly just be more awful than they were before, and they don't see the consequences, they don't see the impact, and that's what causes that. But at the same time, it is an avenue. If it stays this way, it doesn't suddenly become nation state internets, which is always the danger around the corner, but we're not there yet. But if it stays the way it is now, it does allow anybody to, like, for example, Bandcamp, something like that, for somebody who's a musician. There's no label. There's no label between you and somebody who likes your music. There's no barrier to discovery the way there was when we were younger, when you could not just walk into a place The only CDs you would see would be the ones that are packaged because there's a single. You have to buy the whole CD for 10 songs, even though you only care about one. Now it's, well, no. You can put out, like you did, one song because you had it. You thought it was worth putting out.
Sure. And
people can find it. Yeah. So it must be really rewarding to see that that's from where you started out. Again, the Wild West days, but it is still kind of like that, right? Where you can have, I mean, a lot of Twitch shows are very freewheeling shows. Leo makes the joke many times about This Week in Google not being about Google for 50% of its runtime.
Right. Oh, man, 50. That's generous for 50% of its runtime. I think these days Google makes up, maybe 15%.
But I would bet that most people, I mean, you're always going to have people say there's not enough whatever show that says it's about this. But I think most people are actually, they're there because they want to hear these people discussing things, and the discussion itself, no matter what it's about, is what it's there for.
Podcasting, if one thing is very clear about podcasting over the years is that personality and interpersonal kind of the interpersonal mix, it's almost like a recipe, is so incredibly important. Content's really important. Don't get me wrong. What you put into it, how you present it, that's all very important. But at the end of the day, if you've got a podcast about nothing and it's two people who are just like bang on, as far as communicating in a way that's engaging, and you as the listener feel like you're there sitting in the room with these two people and you want to be there, you want to be their best friends because they're obviously best friends. And like it goes so far. There's just the importance of the personality that is, involved in the podcast. And then content is also, like I said, it's very important, but man, you got to start with that. If you don't have that, it's probably not going to go very far.
Well, it's sort of the Seinfeld model, right? Because Seinfeld, famously the show about nothing.
Yeah.
And that really laid out in some, I mean, I'm sure they weren't predicting the internet, but there is almost and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that show. It's fine, but I'm not necessarily a super fan of it. But there's certain things about it, and that's one of them where I think, oh yeah, this is eventually what podcasting became, was this idea that a show doesn't have to be, nothing has to be, again, it's the Wild West model where there's no formatting to it. There is still a freedom to it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm kind of glad. I mean, I know there's a negative side to the bubble bursting, which of course is the advertising falling through the floor. That's the negative side of it, is now, as typically happens, it's an overreaction to what was honestly an overinvestment. This is kind of the same thing we've seen over and over in all different sectors. Trend comes up, jump on it, put too much money into it without thinking it all the way through, and then when it fails, it's suddenly, well, it's a failed model. Well, no, it isn't. You didn't know what you were doing. It's stamping out podcasts was never going to work, right? I mean, that was never going to be a successful model.
I mean, it's also it's also a victim of timing. Podcasting went through a pretty crazy uptick during the pandemic, which impacted so many things so deeply, and really, I think, gave an artificial boost to well, it's not artificial. People were there. People were listening. So I guess it's unfair to say that it's artificial. But it really kind of like primed the pump for people with podcasting. It's like, well, now we've got, all this kind of free time. Like, how are we going to entertain ourselves when we're locked in our house for literal years? And, and along with so many other different, aspects of the economy, there was opportunity there, and there was money to be thrown at it because money was not being spent in other ways. And I think we're just now kind of like facing a little bit of the reckoning of like, okay, well, that's not a forever thing. Nothing is forever. And now we have to kind of find our footing and recalibrate to a new normal. And that's where we're at.
And I just realized now that we kind of jumped over completely because I started rambling about other things, but where you went from CNET to Twit. So what was the connection from, because Twit is kind of to me that Leo's formatting from the screensavers, it naturally carried over into Twit. And it is probably one of the most, I would call, my description only, the most well-organized podcast networks in terms of technology. I mean, there's comedy in all those different sectors, mm-hmm. but I think Twit is, by many people, probably regarded as kind of the most, I guess, well-organized is the right word for it. I don't know. I'm coming up short on descriptions because I'm just don't have that well-formed of a brain.
Twit's been around since 2005.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I mean, you know, say what you want about the business or about the content or anything like that, but I mean, Twit's been around for almost 20 years, and you know, they've been a solid business for that amount of time, making money, paying people salaries. I mean, it's pretty remarkable what Leo has done from the very beginning, and created, you know, what is you know, an incredibly successful podcast network. So I feel like it's pretty commendable. But how did I get to Twit? Well, so I was at CNET, and you know, producing Buzz Out Loud, and eventually, you know, kind of started talking on the show, which, you know, Tom and Molly were very welcoming about that. And ultimately I ended up kind of in a role where I was managing CNET's podcast stable, if you want to call it that. So I was really kind of coordinating a lot of things. I was doing, you know, a lot of stuff with wrangling the technology on how the podcast turned into video and how we streamed that online. So community engagement and all this stuff. I was also hosting a couple of other podcasts for CNET. And Tom Merritt has history with Leo Laporte. He was involved with Tech
He
TV.
did Tech News Weekly for a while, right? He was the
yes,
no,
that's
yeah,
coming.
okay.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. But prior to that, Tom had history with Leo. Tom was actually involved with Leo in the Tech TV days, and so there was always kind of like a little bit of a collaborative, like, oh, we'll have Leo on Buzz Out Loud sometimes, or Leo would have Tom on This Week in Tech, and yeah, around you know, 2010, I think it was 2009, 2010, I can't remember, somewhere around there. Leo offered Tom a job at his new, you know, podcast network. Twit was more than just a show of This Week in Tech, you know, that started in like 2004 or whatever. Leo had, you know, kind of broadened it out to a few other shows and wanted to kind of scale up. And so he wanted to bring Tom on to be the host of a new daily, you know, show on technology, and ultimately hired Tom away from CNET. And Tom started Tech News Today, which was kind of the daily show with Becky Worley. And so he started doing that. And then soon after that, I kind of got a call from Tom, and, you know, he was like, so, what do you, are you interested in maybe producing my show over here? Because he had needs for a producer, and he wanted to pull me over. And so I was like, heck yes, because I've always loved working with Tom. I learned so much with him, and he's just such an incredible, like, human. He's just incredibly giving, and, you know, really just a wonderful guy to work with. And so he pulled me over to Twit, and I interviewed, and they hired me, and you know, they knew that, like, I could produce shows, but I was also hosting an Android show for CNET called Android Atlas Weekly. And so Tom was like, you know, you get a producer, but you also kind of get a host if you want, with Jason. And so they hired me, and I started working with Tom. That was my kind of initial assignment, was producing Tech News Today with Tom, and which is, you know, it's a daily show, so that's 5 days a week. As you know, Joe, producing a podcast just one day a week is a challenging thing. I mean, that right there was kind of, at least initially, kind of a full-time job, coming in and producing a 5-day, you know, a daily show on technology. It took a lot of work.
Yeah, there's a reason I limit my daily episodes to 5 minutes, except for Friday, because I don't need that much work. But,
Yeah.
but I wonder if was some of the appeal too that, I mean, CNET was an established company, it had been around. It was kind of a, I'm not going to necessarily say it was corporatized top to bottom, but it was a kind of a.
No, but it was. I mean, you know,
it had its rhythms and its systems that you were expected to work within, I guess is the way.
For
to
sure.
put it. Just like most big companies are.
Yeah.
So was coming to Twit kind of a nice change where not necessarily you could just do whatever you wanted, but was there more? Did it feel more like you were getting back into a more malleable kind of place where it was more open to, okay, well, we can play around a little bit here and there with when there's a good idea. Okay.
Absolutely. You know, but I also didn't know what I didn't know as far as, you know, my first professional job was CNET. So I didn't know what it's like to go from a big company environment and go into a small business and do podcasting. But but ultimately at the end of the day, I knew that Tom Merritt wanted me there. And so I was like, right there, I was like, all right, 100% I'm in, where you go, I go. And I knew
that's a best case scenario, isn't it? When you somebody that you rely on says, hey, this is a place to be. Because most people do not have that kind of avenue. Most people, they're jumping in with no knowledge, but to have somebody
totally.
There,
it
that's
made
a hell
it
of an
so
advantage.
much better to have someone, someone there. Plus, I had worked with Leo, a number of times in Buzz Out Loud, so it wasn't as if Leo had no clue who I was. He didn't know me very well. But I knew enough about Leo to know, like, all right, this man, this guy's he's a pro. And he's kind of a legend, in tech TV circles and in podcasting and stuff. So I bet you I'd learn a lot working with him. And so, yeah, it was just very obvious. Like, all right, let's do this. Let's see what comes up around it. The only kind of like detraction was, or thing that I was like concerned with was that. TWiT is in Petaluma, California. And if anyone, and I was living in San Francisco at the time, so anyone who is not familiar with Bay Area kind of geography and everything, Petaluma is about 45, 50 minutes north of San Francisco.
Except it isn't that, because when you're trying to escape the Bay Area, it's not 45 minutes usually.
Well, it depends on what time you're leaving. When I was when I was living in San Francisco and going to work in Petaluma, like when I was actually hitting the road, was not thankfully high commute hours. So
then you lucked out
so my drives were pretty reasonable. But I mean, still, it's it's proximity, and it took a lot. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I'll just say that a lot of podcasts and a lot of Howard Stern at that time. So that was kind of like, all right, so I'm going to take this job in Petaluma and be driving a lot, but I think it's worth it. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, like I'm very happy that I did that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like what you were talking about in terms of, okay, I'd like to end up in a recording studio type of thing. I mean, more or less, it sounds like what you do is not the same.
No.
Okay, well, here's an interesting question, and this is a pure hypothetical. I'm certainly not implying that you want to leave Twitter or anything, but if somebody were to come to you and say, hey, that dream job you always wanted, doing the band recording stuff, because I have a friend who does exactly what you're talking about. He's a sound engineer. He's worked with like Rush and he loves it. I mean,
I'm sure he does.
And it's all freelance, so he'll ski for 3 months and then he'll work for 3 months. And I'm like, yeah, at some point, man, you're going to get too old for that, but enjoy it while you can. That's your life. Go for it, man.
Yeah.
And he's having a blast. So if somebody were to come to you, do you still feel like that is the dream job, or has this become, because I'm wondering if I'm trying to phrase it correctly. Cause like, I'm not like trying to phrase it like you're sitting there waiting to get out. That's not at all what I mean, but has this type of creativity in that method, is it filling the same craving you had for what the recording engineer job would have been? Or is there still a party that says, boy, yeah, this is great, but that is still like the dream job, that if something came up with that is still what I'd kind of want to do? Or is this kind of that for you now? It's basically taken the place of it.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love what I do. And I feel very fortunate and blessed that I get to like.
Yeah, I don't want to imply anybody that I know anything secret that Jason's miserable.
I'm not worried about it.
I'm just making sure I'm making that clear.
Concerned. I think everybody at TWiT would probably understand. Like if I suddenly was in a magic wonderland where suddenly my dreams could come true and I could work in a recording studio, it'd be really hard for me not to say yes. I mean, to be completely honest. I love music and I love working with music. And as much as I love podcasting, music's still just a little bit more. You know what I mean? Like it would be hard for me to turn something like that down. At the same time, I also recognize kind of the reality of my life and where I am now. I'm late 40s. I have a family. I have 2 wonderful daughters, and they're entering a period of their lives where, well, we are entering a period of our lives where we're starting to realize, me and my wife, where we have a handful of years with our kids left before they fly the coop, And working in a recording studio can be a very all-consuming career. Like, you are in there And sometimes it's feast or famine. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not easy for me to answer that with any sort of definitive. It would be a situational thing. I would be certainly enticed, but I would really have to analyze and understand what the reality of the time spend would be, because working in a studio to that degree made a lot more sense prior to kids, and honestly prior to getting married. If it had happened prior to getting married, I mean, I would have been the studio guy that was in there, 20 hours a day. I just know it. I know that I would have. But because I have, I have people who I love in my life that I want to spend time with and everything, different priorities. It's harder for me to sacrifice my time like that nowadays. It's one thing that Twit has been really amazing about. We have a 4-day work week here, which gives me 3 days off a week. And it's just like, it's invaluable, the amount of time I get to spend with my family, which is exactly where I want to be. So having said all that, I think what my hack for that has been over the years is making sure that I'm making time for music for myself. Because when I don't do that, I do feel a level of dissatisfaction in my life. I do feel like I've got so much to be thankful for. Everything's really great. And I'm feeling this sense of lack, or this sense of something missing. When I bring music back into the fold and I make time, I prioritize it for myself, everything gets better. And so that's just that's a lesson that I learn off and on and have throughout my adult life, because I totally have times where I'm making a lot of music, and then I have times where I'm super dry, or I'm just like over it, and I'm like, I just need a break. And so it ebbs and flows and it comes in and out. But that's been my hack.
Well, and that's kind of, I was in my head, I was thinking that because my friend is a audio engineer, he doesn't have kids, and he just bounces around. And I think at one point I said to him, I said, man, if you had kids, this life would burn you out, because it does seem like it is hours and hours and hours. And that's what I was kind of curious about, is if doing this, because it is a creative outlet. It may not be music necessarily, but it is an interactive creative and a collaborative environment. Yep. And that's kind of what I was wondering, is I know for some people, when they get into that, whatever that alternate career was, because like I said, there's some people who do what they want to do the whole time, and they're very lucky. Mm-hmm. And there's other people who have these kind of left and right turns. And in many cases, they say something similar, where they say, well, I may not have been able to do what I thought I wanted to do when I was younger, because I would get older. And this actually has ended up being the better thing, because it allows me to, like you, spend time with your family, or not have to give your entire life to something, because there you risk burnout too. That's the other side of that. Is it's great when you're 20 and you have what feels like endless energy and no entanglements to anything. You're like, I could do this forever. Right. And most of the time you can't. I mean, that's just the reality. Is at some point you're going to look around and go, oh, now I hate this. And that's, to me, is worse. That to me would be the worst thing to happen. So
yeah, and I've had moments in my in my adult life where I was working at CNET, and I was also writing music for a composer. I was working at CNET. That was my full-time gig. But also on the side, I was working with a composer, and he wrote music for this NPR show called Life, Love, and Health at the time. And he wanted kind of an assistant to help write music for this show. And so, I would get assignments from him like, all right, you've got a week. I've got 2, 90-second songs that I need from you. One is about an episode that deals with teen suicide. Another episode is, has to do with postpartum depression or something like that. Really, really cheery examples that I decided to throw out. There were some really good ones too.
Okay, good. I was going to say, if this is all you're writing for, at some point now you do hate music.
No. But my point is, at a certain, which was a really fun exercise, and I wouldn't say it paid amazing, but it was a nice little bonus. But at a certain point, I did kind of burn out on it, and I realized in that experience, like, hey, you know what? Maybe music is the thing that I do for me, and it doesn't have to be this thing that I generate income with, because that kind of changes it, right? And it's not that way for everybody. There are a lot of people that can take their passion and turn it into a career and not reach that point of like, ugh, now I suddenly hate this thing I used to love. And I wouldn't say that I hated it, but I definitely saw the other side of it. And through that experience, I kind of learned like, okay, it's actually probably a really good thing that music isn't my full time, because I would hate to find myself at a point in life where I dislike making music anymore, because it's just such a rewarding thing for me on a personal level to do that, and to lose that. Like I just would not want to risk that. So
I know exactly. There's a lot of that I see where people, because the phrase is, "Oh, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life." And in the back of my head, I'm like, well, that's sort of true, and it's sometimes true, but it's not always true.
Could work out that way. Yeah.
There's people who can sit on Twitch and stream all day, and they don't ever seem to burn out on it, even though it takes a ton of work. People think it's nothing, and it's not nothing. I mean, it
for sure,
excruciating to me to try to do that all the time. But then there are also people who burn out on it, and you see it a lot, where people say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I loved it, but it's just I'm sitting here, and it's just all this all the time. And I think some people, like you said, are geared for that, and some aren't. So,
and I have to imagine the ones that are geared for that. I mean, man, at some point it's got to be too much, right? Like, you just haven't hit your point yet.
I assume it's kind of like most things, where if you do it and find success, the amount that you have to do it probably reduces, because the success offsets it. That's a guess. I don't know that, but that's what it feels like. Because otherwise, who could do that all the time? It just, you drive yourself into the ground, and and I don't think it's healthy, because you're just destroying your passion for it, and you're ruining yourself. Whereas, like you said, if you do it on the side, if it's a creative release, if it's a way to kind of do something purely because you love it, that to me is so much better in terms of not only your own health, but probably what you're outputting is going to be better, because there isn't the pressure and the misery of cycling through this over and over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. Absolutely. I think the quality of what you create when you have the space to kind of just to settle a little bit versus that pressure to continue. I mean, we hear so much about YouTubers and about how the amount of work that it takes to really scale up on YouTube, and the amount of times you're creating new content and then editing the content and publishing it, and like there's never really a destination. It's never really like, all right, you've done it. Even when you get to the top, you have to continue doing, and that's why burnout exists. At a certain point, like I can't imagine there is a YouTuber alive that could do that for 50 years. You know what I mean? Like, no flipping way. Like at a certain point, you burn out, and you just haven't reached it yet.
You're doing it in a very casual way. Or you don't. It's like I don't care type of YouTube content, which, great. Then if you can do that and get an audience, then that's the best one, is where you really don't have to. But as an example, and I think Michael Fisher, who's Mr. Mobile. I've had him on
absolutely.
A couple times.
Michael's a friend. He's awesome.
Yeah, he's great. And I'll email him every once in a while and say, hey, because he and I both love Star Trek. I'll be like, hey man, let's do a Star Trek show. And I say the same thing every time, because he'll come back and say, oh, I'm really busy, I've got to do mobile. I'm like, look, whenever. I'm like, I will work around you, because you have to produce all this stuff. I'm not doing any of that. My thing is, we're sitting here doing audio only, and I really don't care if suddenly a chair crashes in the background. It's not going to get cut out, so don't worry about it. And he'll be apologetic, and I'm like, don't apologize. I see what you're doing, and I can't imagine. Plus, I don't like traveling as much as he does, but I'm like, to have to produce the high level of stuff you do.
Oh, such a high level. I admire his work so much.
He's great.
He's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And B, the quality of his work is remarkable. In fact, I just emailed him a couple of weeks ago, because I was watching, he had a review of the Pixel Fold. And I was watching it, and I noticed something, and I had to send him a message, because I'm sure like only a small, maybe one other person would notice this sort of thing, but I definitely did. I was like, so Michael, I couldn't help but notice when you're out on the street, and kind of doing your dialogue and your VO, and it shows you like out on the street with a phone, every time you flipped it closed, it played a sound, like it played a very close up, almost Foley version of the sound of the flip of the phone flipping closed. I was like, you recorded that and flew that in after the fact, didn't you? And he was like, oh my God, I can't believe that you noticed that. And I noticed it throughout the video. And I was like, those are the kind of touches that make you amazing at what you do, because most people will see that and not even blink. They won't even think about it. But what it does is it takes what would have been this very noisy kind of like, street noise and, kind of clinky thing over a street noise. And he's able to isolate. I mean, he's really doing what filmmakers do on product reviews. I'm such a fan of his work.
Oh yeah. His e-bike review was one of the best things I've watched in recent memory, where he did the whole 100, however many miles. I don't know if you saw that one where he took the electric bike.
I didn't see that one. No.
Oh, that one, I think I emailed him, or it was on social somewhere, and I was like, man, that's something you put in the portfolio if anybody ever comes to you. And it's like, you got to watch this one, because it was so expertly done. All the stuff you're talking about. And that's what I mean about, when somebody like that is like, well, I'll try to, I'm like, man, whenever, because people do not have the appreciation of how much work goes into that. And like you said, I don't know how people can keep that up. I mean, it's exhausting. And I don't know anything. I certainly am no kind of video editor. I'm not a producer. I can barely keep audio straight. And so when I look at that and see what's involved, I mean, I've done little light video editing for garbage YouTube videos of like gameplay. That's it, where I put an intro title. And I'm exhausted at the end of that. And it took me, it's literally a minute and a half of anything to try to put together everything, recording, scripting, making sure the environment's good, all the shots you have to get. It's just, I don't know how some people do it. I without a team of people, I guess. And I think Michael Fisher's great.
Yeah, he is awesome.
All right, well, I think we're in a good spot to wrap up this segment. So we're going to do 2 parts, if that's all right with you, if you're not falling asleep. I'm not boring you to death.
I'm good.
Okay. So I'm going to remind everybody that you can find Jason's work over at twit.tv, because you are doing... Now, okay, wait. Because are the shows that you're currently on, are those Club Twit exclusives, the regular ones, or not? Because we should promote that too.
Yeah, so just real quick, the shows that I'm kind of known for, I'd say, and then doing right now. And I say that because All About Android is probably one of the shows that I'm most known for at Twit, but actually just got canceled. So we did All About Android for 13 years, and unfortunately, the numbers had been falling. Kind of hit a point to where they figured we can either keep like trying to lift this up, or you can try something new. And I mean, let me just say, like, it wasn't necessarily a choice that I had. Like, All About Android was going away. I was going to do something new, but I understood where they were coming from. So I'm working on an artificial intelligence show. That happens inside of what we call Club Twit, which is like a subscription tier of our content. So, we have like a Discord and all this other stuff. But
oh yes, I'm aware of the Discord. I'm sure I
yes indeed. I'm aware that you're aware of the Discord as well. So we we have some of our content. A lot of our content is free outside of the club. Some of our content is only for the paid members. And so the AI show that I'm working on will be in the club, at least in the beginning. If it gets big enough, they'll pull it out of the club. And then the other show that I do is Tech News Weekly. I do that every Thursday with Micah Sargent, one of the other hosts here.
Oh, yeah. How the hell did I... Sorry, everybody. I am an idiot. I was thinking of Hands-On Tech and the AI.
I mean, Hands-On Tech...
I just completely blanked on the weekly show when I watched it every... Oh. God.
Yeah, no. Hands-On Tech, I mean, that's another show. I mean, we've got a lot of shows, and some of them are kind of like they happen when they happen. Like Tech News Weekly, yeah, that's a weekly show. It's like interviews and some, news stories. It's basically like 4 or 5 stories that Mike and I choose to talk about, either in the form of interviews or just, discussion between the two of us, things that really caught our attention. But something like Hands-On Tech, like that's... used to be a formal show. Now it's more like, hey, Nothing sent me the Nothing Phone 2 to review. I'm going to review it on Hands-On Tech. So it's kind of like as we have it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm doing stuff in all different, aspects. And then when Leo Laporte goes away on vacation, I'll fill in for him as a host on This Week in Google or Security Now, sometimes Twit even. So, yeah, all over the place.
Yeah, and to anybody who is a regular viewer of Twit, you probably were doing what I do when somebody forgets something obvious and sitting there going, Tech News Weekly. Hello, Tech News Weekly. I do the same thing. You were right. I completely blanked on it. I knew there was something regular. That's what I was trying to get to. And I'm sitting there going, because you're right. And I think Twit does a really good. Now, I had always said with our show that it was always going to be free. Not that there was ever any danger of people paying for it. But it was the same thing where it was like, okay, there are shows that will always be free. They're always going to be free. And then if people want to donate, which is essentially what Club Twit is, and then there's more content behind it, which I think is, honestly, is a very good model, is to, okay, you have a section of shows that are free, and then you have more stuff for people who want more. And I think that's a really, really good model. But I jumped on, I don't remember how many years ago, and I've never regretted it. So if
Nice,
I did a show about this a while ago after Hands-On Photography also got, I don't even like to say canceled. It's no longer there in its current form. Who knows what will happen in time.
Yeah.
But Ant did a really great final episode where he was emphasizing, don't sit on the sidelines, go out there, take photos and all that stuff. And Ant's great. Ant is a really great guy.
I love Ant. He's great.
And I did this episode where I said, you know what? It's very easy to just assume that stuff that you like is there and it's just going to be there. And that's not the case. So if you like something, if you can, I always say if you can, then support it, because otherwise a week from now, who knows? Because things change, and there is a broader economy that does influence things. It would be great if we could just make things for free. Believe me, I'd love it, because then I'd never shut up. But that's not really the world that we're in. So, yeah. So, that I don't know where I was going with that as far as an ending. But twit.tv is where you can see everything that Jason does, as well as all the other people that are part of Twit. And I think it is probably, like I said, as far as technology networks, it is absolutely at the top, in my opinion.
Thank you.
My opinion doesn't count for much, but that's what it is.
It does to your listeners.
Well, we'll find out, I guess. We'll see. We'll see. So, so Jason will come back. We'll do one more segment. And until then, I will remind her. Is there anything else you want to plug, Jason, before? Well, I would say go to Yellow Gold Music.
Sure.
.net.
Yeah. Yellowgoldmusic.com. I know it's confusing. JasonHowell.net or yellowgoldmusic.com.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm going to correct my notes because I'm going to get it right the next time.
I threw out a couple of different domains there earlier, so it's easy to get them twisted.
The show notes will be right, because I do double check those. So even if you didn't get what I said, all this stuff will be covered in the show notes. There will be links. Everything will be there. And if you are still around and want to listen to older episodes and listen to how bad I am at all those as well, all of them are at ozonenightmare.com. Click the podcast link. There's an archive there, and you can listen to Ant Pruitt, who was on previously. I think that was last year. And Michael Fisher. There's a couple. We did a couple Star Trek episodes. So little teasers, I guess, as much as I ever do them, to stuff that you might want to go and listen to as my voice starts to shatter. And so now I'm going to shut up so that we can end this segment and come back for part 2. So we'll be back in a week. And of course, if you want to let us know how you enjoyed the conversation, use the little contact link on the show homepage, or you can just email theozonenightmare@gmail.com. I apologize that it's that long, but I have to keep the show branding consistent. So on that note, Jason, thank you for doing this. We'll be coming back.
John. Appreciate it.
Now I will shut up and say we'll talk to you again next week. Visit ozonenightmare.com to subscribe to new episodes, browse through our back catalog, or to find links to support the show. Follow @OzoneNightmare on Twitter for the latest episode postings and other show information. If 280 characters just isn't enough, you can always email us at ozonenightmare@gmail.com. Music for Ozone Late Night is provided by Ogre. Visit ogresounds.bandcamp.com to hear and purchase his fantastic selection of music.